Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Petra Tanos. I am with the Tropical Forest Alliance. I'm delighted to have you here today for this fantastic opportunity to learn from several TFA partners on what it takes for companies to engage at jurisdictional scale and what claims can be made about their engagement. This webinar is a follow-on to a broader virtual event that took place during Climate Week in September that was co-hosted with UNDP, WWF, ISEAL Alliance, ProForest, as well as the Tropical Forest Alliance. And it's a follow-on workshop where we get to dig a little deeper around the questions of how companies can practically engage. Today's event in particular is being co-hosted with the support of WWF and the ISEAL Alliance. And just a quick operational comment. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please do post them in the Q&A, and we will endeavor to respond to as many questions as possible in writing through the Q&A function. The webinar is being recorded, and a recording will be circulated to participants after the webinar. And with that, I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. So delighted to have with us Akiva Fishman, Natasha Schwartzbach, Olivier Tichit, and Patrick Mallet with us today. And you'll be hearing a bit about some of the resources that have been created to support companies with engaging in jurisdictional and landscape initiatives. And most crucially, an opportunity today to hear directly from companies, namely PepsiCo and Musim Mas, on what actions they're taking concretely to engage at landscape and jurisdictional scale. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Akiva from WWF to kick us off. And thanks very much for joining.
Thanks so much, Petra. And it's great to be here with everybody today. This guidance that I'm going to spend a few minutes talking through is addressed to companies, and it's all about answering the question, what specific action can you take to engage in landscape and jurisdictional initiatives? If you joined the sister webinar a few weeks ago that UNDP hosted on corporate engagement, you learned about two other pieces of guidance that address the more preliminary questions that confront companies of why engage in these sorts of approaches, and then how to begin thinking about that engagement. The guidance that I'll be talking about is for companies that are bought into the value of landscape and jurisdictional approaches, and maybe they've begun thinking about where they might engage. Now they're looking for guidance on what they might actually do. So I'm going to briefly walk through this guidance, which WWF developed together with ProForest and TFA. And then we're going to take it out of the realm of the theoretical by turning to Natasha and Olivier from PepsiCo and Musim Mas to talk to their company's experiences, talking about taking some of the actions that are described in the guidance. Next slide, please. The guidance was designed to be super practical. It's centered around these 20 concrete interventions that companies can undertake separately or in conjunction with each other to support scaled, place-based, multi-stakeholder sustainability efforts. These interventions were distilled through a series of workshops that we convened last year with companies representing a range of commodity supply chains and occupying the full breadth of positions along the value chain. This graphic categorizes the interventions according to intervention type. So Group A consists of interventions around participating in planning processes and aligning with other stakeholders. For example, the interventions include co-designing jurisdiction-level goals, KPIs, and strategies with other stakeholders, supporting land use planning, and contributing key spatial data needed for the planning process. In Group B, we've got interventions focused on building the capacities of multi-stakeholder groups and of local communities to participate in them. Group C is about enhancing the commitment and capacity of government to act on sustainability at scale. Group D focuses on leveraging supply chain efforts to advance landscape or jurisdiction scale efforts. Group E includes actions that support and incentivize sustainable production practices. And finally, Group F looks at ways companies can support financing for landscape and jurisdictional initiatives. What the guidance does is to flesh out each of these 20 interventions, and users can see the guidance either as a PDF or as a dynamic website. The PDF can be read like a booklet where users can look at the table of contents to see which intervention they want to learn more about and then turn to the proper page. The website has the same content, but it allows users to modify how the interventions are organized to suit their preference. I won't, of course, walk through all the great content in the guidance during this session, but what I want to do is to at least give you a sense for the rich details it contains and how you can use the guidance. To do that, I'll show you how one of the 20 intervention looks in the PDF version, and then I'll show you how the online version works. So let's go to the next slide. This is one of the interventions as it appears in the PDF version of the guidance. This one looks at how companies can support governments in developing jurisdictional policies, tools, and investment strategies. The first thing the guidance does is to give a handful of case summaries that describe how companies are already implementing the intervention out in the world. For this intervention, the cases include the collaborations going on in Indonesia and Cote d'Ivoire, where companies are working with government to shape the national level policy to infuse forest conservation into agricultural development planning. Our aim with these short examples is to get a feel for how companies are implementing the intervention so that other companies can understand how they might do something similar in the landscapes or jurisdictions that they're focused on. PepsiCo and Musimas are among the companies that feature in several of these case summaries, so I'm excited that in a few minutes they'll give a flavor for some of the experiences that you'll find reflected in the cases. On the right-hand side, we give the approximate length of time a company might expect implementation of this intervention to take. In this example, there's a short to medium-term duration of between 6 months to 2 years. Beneath there, we give a sense of the relative cost to a company, using a scale between $1 and $4 signs to indicate low to high cost. So you can see that this intervention is on the lower cost end of the spectrum. If you could turn to the next slide. Here we're keeping with the same intervention. So the next thing the guidance does is to provide some of the key points to help companies understand the critical steps to take and potential pitfalls to avoid. There are short and tightly focused key pointers on what companies need to know or do. For this intervention on supporting governments to develop jurisdictional policies, tools, and investment strategies, one of the points that we flag is the importance of working with government in an open manner that avoids any perception of unduly influencing public officials to advance private interests. Moving over to the right, the guidance lists external conditions that increase the likelihood that this intervention will succeed. These pointers help companies consider whether an intervention is ripe for implementing in the particular region they're focused in. For example, some interventions might be premature if certain baseline information at the jurisdictional level has yet to be compiled. Other interventions might depend on locally available expertise, without which implementation would be challenging. Finally, there is a set of bullets that outlines the business case for undertaking this specific intervention. This section can be especially useful to company staff who are looking to make the case internally for allocating resources to take certain actions. So this is how the interventions and the content are displayed in the PDF version of the guidance. If you'll advance the slide, we'll see how the website looks. So the first thing that a user sees is a sortable list of categories for organizing the 20 interventions in useful ways. And this is basically a menu that lets you decide how to group the action options. So for instance, you could choose, as is done on this slide, company's supply chain position from the tabs that you see at the top. This will group the interventions by relevance to different types of companies. And then you can click on the left-hand side to display the interventions that are relevant to producers, upstream buyers, or downstream buyers. Or if you wanted to see the interventions grouped by their relative cost, you could click on the Cost to a Company tab at the top. And the next slide shows that. So if you could just advance to the next slide. Oh, there you go. So if you click on the dollar sign now on the left to see the least costly interventions, you could click on the $4 signs to see the interventions with a higher cost, or anything in between. Once you've chosen the categorization that you want, you can click on any intervention box on the right to be taken to the guidance that fleshes out that intervention. And then the content you'll see is the same content as in the PDF version that we looked at before. So that's my brief overview of how the guidance is structured and a taste for the content that you'll find within it. But to really breathe life into some of the interventions that the guidance discusses, I'll now invite Natasha and Olivier to speak to what PepsiCo and Musimas have done to engage in landscape and jurisdictional initiatives. Natasha is the Sustainable Commodities Lead for PepsiCo, and Olivier is the Director for Sustainable Supply Chains at Musimas. So let's start with Natasha. Natasha, over to you.
Thanks very much, Akiva. And thank you all very much for this opportunity to talk about landscapes. You know, it's a #1 priority, and it's great to see that so many people are now really interested in it. From a PepsiCo perspective, just to give a bit of a context, we source 25 different crops from 60 different countries, and that employs over hundreds of thousands of people within our agricultural supply chain. So when we think about, you know, our role, we really recognise that we have an opportunity to use our global scale to really drive transformation on the ground. And also we need to do it because we want to be able to grow food sustainably, and a landscape model helps to be able to do that. If we think about, you know, why a landscape? I mean, for years and years, companies have been very much focused on their own supply chain. And yes, that's still very much important and will play an important role. However, when we look at what's happening within a landscape, whether that be a province, a state, a market, whatever categorization it is, we realize that there are systemic issues. So it's not just isolated to the one crop. And what the jurisdictional or a landscape initiative approach, it gives you the ability to really better understand that production level. And it provides you with an opportunity to be more effective with regards to learning about what actually happens at that level. For PepsiCo, we also see that working within the landscapes is that it's one part of our portfolio of solutions when we're looking to drive that transformational change. When we started to begin developing our thinking about, well, what's our role as PepsiCo in these landscape initiatives? You know, and we thought, okay, our role is really to be that catalyst for change. So how do we do that? And we developed 3 general principles around that. It was really important, particularly for us, to have those principles when we look at palm oil, because, you know, as you know, we have a very large supply base and we source from a high number of landscapes. So it's not possible for us to be everywhere and to do everything. So we need to ensure that we are collaborating with a whole range of stakeholders and really to help to drive that action that's needed. And also that's where the knowledge base is. So we have 3 levels of engagement. The first one is really around, you know, when we look at a landscape initiative, where will we lead? Where will we actively support? And where will we participate? So if you go in with sort of thinking about those 3 levels, we then started to think about, okay, if we are committed to engage at this industry level, so who do we need to engage with? We need to engage with the actors of the supply chain, industry, civil society, communities, suppliers, and our peer companies, because that's how you can together move collectively and drive progress and accelerate it if you're all moving together. So whilst we've looked to play an active role in that wider transformation, one of the areas I've been asked to talk about is, so what's the benefits of engaging? Well, there are a number of benefits, but the highlights for us is really 3. 1, we can be that catalyst for change. We invest in the change, and it's important to invest. It provides us with an opportunity to shape and co-design that program with the stakeholders. It provides us with a deeper knowledge and understanding of the issues and puts us in a proactive learning position. So the other area we've been asked to talk about is, you know, what landscapes are we involved in? It's really difficult just to choose one landscape to talk about because we are committed to 4 landscapes, 3 in Indonesia and 1 in Mexico. They have different elements to it, but they're all aligned with our policy commitments and also about driving that transformational change that is needed on the ground. They're about restoration, they're about RSPO certification, or, you know, biodiversity, climate, smallholders, improving livelihoods. All of them have those sorts of elements to it. And Akiva, you touched on 20 concrete actions that could come out from a landscape program. So whilst I'm not going to share 20 of them, what I would like to do is perhaps share 5 of them. So the first one is around local government engagement. It's really important, and one of the landscapes that we have that we're working with, we have a deep local government engagement and commitment. And that commitment of local government wanting to work with all actors of the supply chain and brands and companies to help, make those significant changes within that landscape is very positive. So that is a concrete action. The second one is around, the protection of forests, and also the beginning of the work of the restoration that we are doing in Indonesia. The third one is the first RSPO certification in Mexico. And that really would not have happened had we not worked collaboratively with all of those stakeholders. And that's the point about actually, better understanding who are those actors in that landscape and how can you co-design a program that is going to meet everyone's needs and be beneficial to that sustainable production. The fourth one is around we have built 9 demonstration farms for palm oil in Mexico. And what these demonstration farms do is it helps others learn good practice. So we have smallholders from all different communities coming to those demonstration farms to see what does good agricultural practice look like? What does good social issues practice look like? And one of the early outcomes we've had from those demonstration farms is an increase in yields of over 20%. And that's just in the first year. So that is a real concrete action from the landscape program. And the fifth concrete action is that we have seen an increase in the inclusion of smallholders within our supply chain. And they are a key component to ensuring that long-term transformational change that's needed at that systemic level. So thank you for the opportunity for sharing that. I'd now very much like to introduce Olivier. And both Musa Mas and PepsiCo are in partnership on a number of landscape programs. So over to you, Olivier.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Well, I feel I'm going to repeat some of the things you say, so which I think is good news. So yeah, what do we do at landscape level? I'm going to be a bit maybe closer to the ground than Natasha, which is quite natural because we are an Indonesian actor in that case. We are a refiner in Indonesia, so we have a closer relationship with the various landscapes because of our business. Like Natasha said, what do we do at landscape level? In reality, what is new in a way is that we collaborate, and that is first. I think for Musimas and for all our peers, we all know now we will not achieve change at landscape level or at the industry level on our own. None of us is that strong, not even Pepsi, not even Musimas, not even some of our other competitors I will not even name. And that was, I think, difficult to accept at one stage. We're very proud companies, we're very successful companies, and so it's a bit hard to swallow, but it was accepted because it makes sense, because we learned also. And so now this being accepted, we at Musimas anyway, we try also to bring an answer to the question, what's in it for me? It's a bit what Natasha mentioned as well. Huh? What can you bring that accelerates change or that makes it lasting? And that is a key element. So for us, we try to answer the question of what's in it for me for as many stakeholders as possible in a landscape. So in our industry in palm, we believe that extension is what we can do best. So technical support to smallholders, if you want. We participate in other activities at the landscape level, but we wanted to have something where we knew we would be good and something on which we could focus the energies of our company and do something where we would know that Musimas can commit and can bring something to the table. And so we thought about it at length because we started doing some extension work. We realized that not only it aligned very well with what we believe, which is You need to support livelihoods if you want to see change. You want also to have things which are long-term. We're talking about palm, which is a perennial crop. So over the years and working on extension, we've developed a concept of what we call the smallholder hub. Not very high-tech, but it's a quite light thing. You're talking about a small team, 2, 3 agronomists, extension officers. They have the right training curriculum that they can deploy. They have booklets, they have other training material. Most important, they have experience. And then critically, they are based in a landscape, and people know now that if we set up a smallholder hub somewhere, it's going to be there for some time. And why do we do that? Because we know change will not happen overnight, and we are only one participant to that change. We bring something, we're very happy to do it. We will do it regardless of the difficulties, of the speed, of the rest of the change in the landscape, but we know it's one element that will help bring the change at a landscape level. So we know we need to gain trust, and so we need to take the time to have our people there. So we start by doing a bit of extension on our own, but that's not the point. The point is, at what stage can we, in Indonesia anyway, change from doing extension to working with the local government for their extension officers to get some additional training from us, some more, some less. There are various levels. And so it means also we do not choose the smallholders who access the training or the extension work. And that's also something we have to do at the landscape level. We cannot be choosy and say, like Natasha said, it was not only about our supply chains. We can't do that anymore. If we want to have real large level change, lasting, we can't be picky. We can't say, oh, that's a Musimas supplier, they get training. No, so we are not choosy. We support extension work at a landscape level, regardless of our supply chain, not our supply chain. And that means also that that means also that we go beyond just the extension work. That's not the real aim of a smallholder hub. What we're trying to do there, as I said, is to support change. What's in it for me? So what we believe is that for a local government, having additional extension work or better quality extension work will help them not only provide better livelihoods, better yields, yes, and that's selfishly also in our interest, future of our industry is smallholders, but also it can support the local government in saying, well, I can give something, I will take something. I will strengthen maybe enforcement in terms of deforestation. Maybe I feel also that with all the extra capacity we have, including the extension work, we can go further, we can go beyond that, and we can maybe make new rules on what are the limits of what you can do, how are we going to stop deforestation in our landscape. And the key is, with our extension work as well, not only is it about Musimas helping, we try to get further people further downstream to also support a hub. And it's not about the money. It's about linking one end of the supply chain to the other end of the supply chain. The recognition factor is cheap, but it's priceless. And Natasha, it's really Natasha's day today, because I must say that we operate in one landscape in Indonesia, which is very successful. It's Aceh Tamiang, it's great. And to me, when there was a recorded message from, I forgot whom, sorry, Natasha, but somebody very high up in Pepsi. And that was recorded and it was played. And that minute and a half, 2 minutes of a message saying, we at the other end of the supply chain, we do not even know what is your contribution to our supply. It was actually minute, I would expect. But that recognition factor does a lot. It links the producers to the consumers. And then what's in it for me, it's not about money, it's about thinking, well, now I know why I'm doing some changes. I know why I've accepted some restrictions, possibly, or things I consider as restrictions. But now I understand that there is a good reason, because there is a link to that market at the other end. That, I hope that made sense in total, but that's how you have to look at what you can do practically, but you have to consider, why do you do it? It's not a CSR, it cannot be a CSR operation. It must have an end to this means. And so as far as we're concerned in Musimas, we believe that our extension work, not only in the short term, It's something we like to do, but we believe it can be an element of change at landscape level, as long as it's not done in isolation, one, and second, as long as it is linking further down the supply chain. Thanks.
Thank you both so much. What interesting comments. I want to start with you, Olivia, just picking up on what you were just talking about. It's so interesting to hear you talk about how Musimas takes the extension work that you mentioned to the landscape scale, training smallholders that aren't even Musimas suppliers. I can imagine that this might be a little bit of a bitter pill for some companies who are not accustomed to doing things that might benefit competitors. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate a bit on the business case for doing this. I mean, you mentioned wanting to make sure that the industry continues into the future. That's a really important point. I'm wondering how do you persuade your colleagues internally to take action like this that might benefit competitors?
Well, there are various levels to that. I'm fortunate because it's not new. So we've had a bit of time, and I think that program has grown on its own as well, and it's shown its results. But how do you convince? There are various levels. There's one, as I said, immediately, an immediate result is that you can improve livelihoods. And that for us is very important anyway. The company is very committed to that. So you have a short-term gain, which is we have helped X smallholders. We believe they've improved their yields. We can see that they're very motivated. If we are lucky enough that we can work with the extension officers of the government, then we have a large multiplying factor. So short term, you have something to show. I would say longer term, I believe we are fortunately now we are past thinking, or I hope most of us, I hope anyway, are past thinking that I have to focus on my supply chain. The problems we have are not exclusively at our suppliers level. Look, palm has a very bad name. We know that. We cannot simply say, I will take care of my suppliers and the others be damned. That is not possible, especially for us looking at smallholders. Smallholders, they sell to you today, they will sell to somebody else tomorrow because they are not direct suppliers to a mill, and that mill is not even our mill, it's the mill of one of our suppliers. So we had to go beyond that thinking. The business case makes sense. I said we need that transformation. We need to have that long-term vision on the business. It's a perennial crop. You must think in decades. So yes, it took a bit of time, but I believe because you can have an immediate impact on smallholders and influence positively their livelihoods, it's a better introduction. It makes it easier to swallow that bitter pill of why on earth are we closing our eyes on the immediate benefit to the company. I think fortunately our industry, maybe more than other industries, because it has been hammered so much for so long and has reacted to it, it has built tools and an intelligence of sorts, or at least it's beginning to understand better what it has to do to still be transforming and to still be in business basically as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Olivier. Natasha, a sort of similar question for you. You mentioned the 5 types of actions that PepsiCo has taken. That was a really helpful, clear listing. And I'm wondering if you could speak to how PepsiCo decided to take those actions as opposed to others. What was the business case for you guys to do those things? You mentioned there's a range of things that could be done. We described 20 interventions in the guidance. I'm sure you guys thought through a lot of other things that Pepsi, in its sort of position in the market, could have done. So why those 5 things in particular?
Yeah, well, I think those, thanks, Akiva. So if we think about the landscape programs that we're in, so for Mexico, for example, the business case for that is that PepsiCo is the largest buyer of palm oil in Mexico. So it makes good business sense. And also, when we first engaged there was no sustainable production of palm oil. So we had a really good opportunity to work with the mills and the smallholders to lift the sustainable production. And, it's almost like creating sustainability from the start. And there was an opportunity to build a relationship with the industry there and our suppliers and the smallholders, because it is much more of a, concentrated industry in Mexico. So for us, it came through because we have that commitment around 100% RSPO certification, and our commitments around no deforestation, no peat, no exploitation. So that comes through the other landscapes as well, is that, you know, as a company, we're very committed to our policies, and to ensure those commitments come to life, we need to ensure we are implementing those policies on the ground. So the landscape, taking the landscape approach allows us to do that, because as Olivier says, you know, these are systemic issues. They're not just isolated to one crop like palm or rubber. So that's why, you know, for the business, it makes sense with regards to implementation of our policies, going beyond our supply chain, and also meeting our sustainable sourcing commitments.
So that's fantastic. And I think it really calls attention to the fact that there are lots of things that are needed in different landscapes, and different companies have really different roles to play depending on their strengths, their interests. And the idea is to bring everybody together, each slotting in ways that make sense. I'm wondering if you guys could each take a minute, and really just a minute or two, because we need to pass on to the next part of the webinar. There are a lot of companies that are listening to you eagerly to hear what you've done and how you've done it and why you've done it. And I'm wondering if you could just think of one or two pointers that you might give to other companies who are considering doing similar things in other landscapes. From your experience, learning from successes and from perhaps there are some failures along the way, what's one or two kind of key points that you'd want to communicate to others to not fall into the same traps or to take advantage of opportunities? So Natasha, start with you.
Thanks, Akiva. Okay, I'll give 3 pointers. First of all, you know, be a good listener and listen to the stakeholders, the various stakeholders. See it as an opportunity for collaboration. And finally, and most importantly, be ready to roll up your sleeves. You know, if you want to be part of that in that leadership role, then roll up your sleeves. You'll learn a lot, and it's a great opportunity for you both personally, professionally, and the business.
Fantastic. Thanks, Natasha. Olivier, how about you?
Well, quite similar. I would say, yes, roll up your sleeves, and most important, be ready for the long run. You have to be, if you're committed to this, you have to be ready to stay for some time, which means it's going to be a bumpy ride, but you have to be ready for that. If you choose something, stick with it, and don't do it alone, definitely. So yes, you have to listen to others, and you have to find the right, or you have to make the others the right crowd. That's the most important. Make do, and a couple of years down the road, you suddenly realize, hold on a second, it's working. Yes, we have been putting a lot of efforts in it, and it is working. So yeah, be ready for the long run. Don't do it alone, definitely. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you. Don't go away. We're going to keep Natasha and Olivier, but we're going to shift to the next topic, which Patrick from ISEAL is going to introduce. So Patrick, over to you.
Great, thanks everyone, and good morning from the west coast of Canada. So I've just got a couple of slides to introduce the second guidance document. Many of you know ISEAL is traditionally associated with sustainability standards. We work to improve the effectiveness of those systems. So when we look at landscape and jurisdictional approaches, you have to think, okay, so why are we engaged? And it's because there is an emerging discussion about how to ensure the credibility of how you measure and communicate progress with these jurisdictional initiatives. You can imagine for Olivier and Natasha and many of you, if you're thinking about investing in landscape and jurisdictions, part of that needs to come with, and is our investment actually making a difference? Are we seeing change on the ground? And how can we communicate about that? So the Making Credible Jurisdictional Claims guidance is exactly about providing some basic background information to start the conversation about what does good monitoring and verification look like at a landscape and jurisdictional level, and how can we learn from all of the good practices that sustainability standards have put in place. One of the things that we want to be clear is that this guidance is coming in very much at the beginning of this conversation. And so it doesn't have all the answers. It's about raising the important issues and really trying to understand and catalyze a conversation about what do we collectively think is needed in order to credibly measure how performance is changing on the ground, and then be able to communicate about that. The guidance itself is positioned very much to support existing initiatives like Landscale, like SourceUp from IDH. And you can see even in the Landscale verification and claims, they have a new guidance out now that's for consultation until the 11th of December, in fact. And with that consultation, their guidance has taken a lot of the same issues that we're addressing and made it more practical and functional. So we want to use the guidance to stimulate that kind of conversation and alignment about how we move forward in these two areas. Next slide. I should mention, of course, this work needs to recognize the support of GIZ and the Walmart Foundation. So the guidance itself is divided into 3 parts, and you can understand that there's work that needs to be done by the jurisdictional initiatives and then also by the companies like Musimas and PepsiCo to support those initiatives. So in the first instance, we're looking at structural outcomes and how can we recognize the good work that stakeholders coming together on the ground, potentially including local governments, can make towards a coherent land use plan and actions on the ground. What we mostly care about and what the bulk of the guidance addresses is then how do we get to the measurement of performance. And so when we think about jurisdictional performance, we need to ensure that we're measuring the right things, that we have good sources of data, that there's some level of alignment between jurisdictions, although that is a tricky topic we may get into in the discussion. And we want to be able to know that we're measuring change over time in a way that is credible and reputable. And part of that is because for companies that are thinking about or are investing or engaging directly in jurisdictions, not only do you want to understand what's the change that you're directly delivering, but also how is that connected to those performance outcomes. So when we think about those supporting actions, in fact, this is the nice tie-in with the guidance from WWF, is it's exactly those types of activities that the companies are investing in and want to communicate about that then inform the link to the performance changes on the ground. Next slide. And so we know that it's difficult to measure and understand performance and change over time, especially at a landscape level. But if we are able to do that successfully, then what are the types of claims that we want to make and that can be made? And there are definitely claims about performance, so about the sustainability changes on the ground. Those can be either about what's the current performance level, what's the change over time, or potentially those more challenging subjective value claims like sustainable or responsible, or some things that are essentially not as easily quantifiable. And then there are also claims about the supporting actions, the type of engagement, the type of contribution that's made, and then most challenging, the link between those contributions and the performance change on the ground. So the attribution of the action to the result. So those are my slides. I want to get into a discussion with Olivier and Natasha. I'm just going to dive right in. Natasha, let's start with you. So if we think, first of all, let's talk about the claims. So as a company, how important is it to be able to communicate publicly? And in doing so, do you already have a sense of the types of claims or communications that you want to make as a company?
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I think that's an interesting question, and with lots of complex answers to that one. But you know, I think as a company, you know, we go in there with the right intent. So our intention is not just to do a landscape program so we can make a claim. Our intention is actually to do the work that's needed. So that's the first, you know, key point for us. And in terms of what sort of claims we make, I mean, these landscape programs we're involved in, they're relatively new. So when you start out in them, they are very much of the aspirational type claim. But we do have some of the landscape programs have very clear data points. So we'll have X number of hectares restoration, X number of hectares, you know, protection of forest, livelihoods, etc. So it's not a one claim overall.
Nice. Yeah. And where do you make those claims? Is that largely for internal annual report type?
All of our programs are, you know, in the public domain. So those claims are made publicly on our website. Yeah, and then through regular reporting, so CDP reporting, ACOP reporting, our own sustainability reporting, you know, transparency and accountability is very much an anchor when we look at that change.
Great, thanks. Olivier, so thinking about this from more the ground level, how important are those data points that Natasha mentioned? Is that really what you're looking for, or how do you translate all that extension work into what you're communicating publicly?
Well, thanks, Patrick. What you said, I'd like to pick on something you said earlier. It's about recognizing the good work. And that's actually at the same time very easy and at the same time not very easy. So I'd say you mentioned also land scale. So yes, we need ways of assessing at landscape level, and not only on our impact, but on what is happening at that landscape level. At the end of the day, how we're going to be assessing it, we are at the end of the day also a PAM company. So what I'm hoping is that using other tools that will assess the performance and the progress of our suppliers in that landscape, it will be some sort of a proxy. And that's maybe what's in it for us. That will be a proxy of the progress of that landscape. We will see the performance, or if we use the IRF tool, the aggregator at the moment, we should be able to see progress of our own suppliers in that landscape. Like I said, it's still our business as well. But yes, I saw there was also a question separately on, can you certify, what standard can you use? I do not believe that we can use certification standards because of the multiple commodities. So I think you've touched to that, you've mentioned that very clearly. Yes, it's the complexity of landscapes. How do we measure? Because we are palm-based, we are palm-centric, and yet we will have an impact on other commodities at the same time. So the tools still need to be developed, I think. I do not think we can stand today and say, we've got it figured and we know exactly how we're going to measure our impacts. But I hope that answered.
Yeah, well, we did get into the monitoring side there, which I think is great. Do you feel that, so you've got existing tools like the IRF, is that something that essentially you're willing to defer to other tools on the monitoring, or at some point, do you feel like Musim-Mas needs to be doing some of that monitoring yourselves?
There's various levels of monitoring. If we are working at a landscape level, we cannot do it on our own. Again, it's not only, we will not be able to claim the results all for ourselves. So again, we have still within our supply chain, of course, the performance of our suppliers for us will be a proxy of the success. But at the landscape level, it will be a discussion between Pepsi, us, a facilitator, and most important, we've not mentioned enough, maybe the local government. We need to get them in as well. They have to get something out of it. Not only the recognition I mentioned as well, but possibly, and again, if we take that very lovely landscape in Aceh, you can see there is an interest by the local government to go beyond and work also on monitoring and see how they can also use it for the implementation and for the planning of their own policies. If we reach that kind of level, well, I think we can say we have succeeded, but we'll need to demonstrate it. Again, we go back to that issue. I think we're not yet we do not yet have the right tools to be able to monitor, but most important, or to demonstrate the impact, most important to be able to transmit that, that value, if you want. Again, like you said, recognizing the good work sounds very easy, but how do you then pass it on? How do I then, Musimas, pass it on to Pepsi in a way that Pepsi can then pass on to its customers in a way that can be trusted? That's a bit trickier. You can read our reports. Pepsi's report is great. Our report is great. How do we make that into valuable, verifiable information? That's a bit trickier. We're not 100% there yet.
No, I would say we're just getting out of the starting gate on that, and it is true that there's you know, as you move from an individual company's supply chain and responsibility to a landscape and jurisdiction, the complexity of that measurement and the ability to coordinate between many different actors makes it increasingly challenging, especially if it's across commodities. And Natasha, to build on that, I wonder if, you know, collaboration is obviously a key theme that's come out of today's conversation so far. Do you feel like there is a need or a necessity to coordinate with other actors in the supply chain when you're thinking about that monitoring? So whose responsibility is it, and how do you align or coordinate between different actors?
Yeah, well, I think that, yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, collaboration is key, and that's, I think, one of the, you know, working in sustainability, we have a really good opportunity to work with our peer companies pre-competitively, because we're all aiming for the same goal. And, you know, whether that be biodiversity, climate, you know, smallholders, livelihoods. And when it comes to that monitoring part of it, that's usually done at the grassroots level. But we need to agree on what is it that we're going to monitor? Where is the baseline? What are the core components that we're looking for in terms of, you know, change? What are they? Are they behavioural change? Is it, you know, or is it about restoration or protection? You know, so you need to have that discussion quite early on, and that's where it comes into being engaged with the right stakeholders, be a good listener, you know, work out what you can measure effectively and meaningfully. And then I think that's where you then start to think about, well, what are the claims that you could then make potentially, knowing that landscape programs are for the longer term.
Yeah, there's a couple of issues in there I want to unpack, but maybe just the first one, thinking about you're working across 5 landscapes. Mm-hmm. How important is it to you to have comparable performance information across those landscapes versus, say, investing in the individual stakeholders to identify what's important to them and to measure what's feasible for them?
I think you'd be quite surprised in that I think most of the stakeholders have the same elements that they want to measure or monitor. So that kind of conversation is relatively easy. Some of the, you know, in terms of when you're working with communities, that's going to be very different for them. So that's where it's important to, you know, roll up your sleeves and be on the ground and understand what's important to them so you can monitor that and they can understand the benefit to them of being part of the program.
And then the second part, the last part of what you said was very much about, as Olivier has also said, we're in this for the long term. This is about long-term change. When we think about claims, is it challenging then to be able to communicate why we're doing this if you're not seeing the practical change on the ground in the first year or couple of years?
Is it challenging? Yeah. Yes, it is, because, you know, companies want results. And I think, you know, we are, you know, whatever company you're in, I mean, we are in an era or period of time where people want to see instant results. And, you know, it's our role to ensure that we are communicating effectively about, you know, all the other elements that we've both, Olivia and I, have talked about around that proactive learning, about being willing to adapt and evolve where a landscape program needs to. And so, yeah, it's not an easy task. It's not, oh, if you give me X dollars, I will deliver you this. That's not how it works anymore, is it, Olivier?
I'll ask the same question to Olivier. You know,
it
how
certainly
challenging
doesn't
is it
work
for
like
you?
that. We cannot, no, we cannot, it's not an investment plan, and we cannot guarantee a return on investment. Right, as you can see between Natasha and I, we have an easy relationship, but keep in mind, they are, in my case, I have competitors as well, and my suppliers have competitors. So what we are trying to learn as well in some of the tools we have to develop are what I call simplistically sharing without sharing. And that's why we like aggregators at times. We need to find ways, and that's why there's that initiative by the World Resources Institute on RAD, what they call RAD, which is not so much about detecting deforestation, but about how do you verify the alerts in a collaborative manner with respecting the fact that you're still competitors. How do you share without sharing? That's the kind of tool we need to develop now. How do you collaborate pre-competitively indeed, but still with respecting everybody's identities, I would say, or rules. How do you do that? And then how do you report that? And how do you monitor what's going on?
It touches on a critical piece here, which is because this is the strength of these initiatives is exactly the collaboration between organizations. I mean, you're starting to see very much some good pre-competitive collaborations between companies to coordinate their investments, to coordinate their actions on the ground. It's interesting to then transpose that to the performance monitoring, where I think a lot of different actors have access to data, and yet it's very difficult to share that data. Can you apply that same principle to the performance data or to results that different organizations have? Is there a need for pre-competitive tools, or how do you get to that sharing without sharing?
With great difficulty. You were talking, we handle, maybe especially us in that case, our suppliers trust us with confidential information. How do we use that without breaching the trust, the bond of trust between them and us? Some are quite open, to be honest. We have suppliers who do not mind. The information they gave us can be used freely. Some are still quite unsure what is going to happen to me if you say something not so good about me, or if people think I'm part of something that's not so good. And even though you might explain, no, it's all right, it's good work, we just want to be able to demonstrate that. We still have that difficulty of the limit of what we can share. What we can use is a lot, but what we can share, I cannot share that with a competitor. I cannot even share that with Pepsi, for example. I would not be able to share it with some third parties. Like you said also, there's a lot of data out there. How do we verify that data? How do we work together in a way that data is not misused? Yeah, there's still a bit of work. Again, we go back to the one example at the moment working quite well in our industry on that aggregator for no deforestation, no peat performance. We seem to be getting there, of having ways to have detailed data, but then you aggregate it in such a manner that it still is meaningful. That is the big trick. How do you aggregate data and not turn it into something totally useless? Yeah. Again, we're learning there, I think. And yeah, sorry it took so long, but I think it's a long road, and I think our industry is coming from quite far and is maybe further, a bit at the front of a few other industries. We should not be ashamed of where we are, but we still have a lot to do, plenty to do, and we need everybody to start pulling. Musimas is not going to do it on its own, and I hope Pepsi can do it on its own. I'll be happy to follow, Natasha, don't worry.
Yeah, we won't be able to do it on our own either. That's why it's so important for everyone to come together and work collectively.
Do you have, to that same question, Natasha, do you have ideas or suggestions for how we can get better at sharing information or data between different actors?
I think there is an opportunity through the NDPE implementation reporting framework when we start to see some of the results coming through. I think some of the mills that perhaps aren't yet in the progressing, that's an opportunity for the industry to come together and peer companies and say, okay, let's put our effort in here to work with those mills to bring them up so that we're looking at a continuous improvement model. And I think if we can do that even in the pilot phase and demonstrate the trust and the building of those partnerships, then that's one step forward, so that there starts to create the next level of trust to move even further along the supply chain.
Excellent. I think we're getting close to the top of the hour. Olivier and Natasha, thank you so much for your candor and just ease of responding to these random questions. It's been a really interesting discussion. I'm going to pass it back to Petra. I just want to remind everyone, in the chat box, we've got the links to both of the resources from today. From ISEAL's side, it certainly is the beginning of a conversation about how do we do this monitoring and verification better, and we're happy to be part of that conversation with all of you. So thanks everyone, and Natasha, back to you, or Petra, back to you.
Great, thanks so much, Patrick and Natasha and Olivier, and thank you to all of our speakers today. I think this has been a fantastic session and just great to get so many insights from folks that are working on this directly. And I think just also a huge thanks to everyone who's on the line and stakeholders that are working very hard to make progress with landscape and jurisdictional initiatives. I think we heard a lot today about how it is a long haul, it is challenging, it requires collaboration and trust over time. And I think that that message rings true, I think, to all of us today. Before we close the webinar, I do just want to highlight again for everyone the Jurisdictional Approaches Resource Hub, jaresourcehub.org, where you can access a lot of the different resources that have been covered on this call and more. There are great case studies from a variety of projects on the ground, and TFA also welcomes contributions from our partners. So if you have resources, materials, case studies that you'd like to share with a captive audience, please do get in touch with TFA. And with that, again, a huge thanks to our speakers and thanks to everyone who is leading the way on this front, and we'll close the meeting for now. Have a fantastic rest of the year.
Thanks very much. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you,
Olivier. Thanks, Patrick and
Thanks,
Akiva.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Akiva.
Bye.
Patrick.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.